Sometimes the cruelest words come from people who've forgotten what it means to truly see someone. In the summer of 1873, the town of Red Bluff decided that widow Martha Briggs was too much woman for any man to want. She ran her late husband's ranch alone, working sunrise to sunset, while neighbors whispered she'd end her days unwanted and forgotten. Then a mountain man named Elias Boone rode into town looking for honest work, not love. He wasn't searching for a wife, and she wasn't waiting to be saved. But when he saw Martha standing strong on her porch, he recognized something the whole town had missed. What happened next proved that real love sees past what others judge, and true strength comes from the heart. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you. Make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Briggs Ranch sat 5 miles east of Red Bluff, nestled in a valley where the grassland rolled gentle before climbing toward the distant mountains. It wasn't the biggest spread in the territory, but it was honest land, 300 acres of decent grazing, a creek that ran year-round, and a 2-story ranch house that Thomas Briggs had built with his own hands 20 years prior. The house showed its age now, paint peeling on the north side where winter winds hit hardest, a few shingles missing from the last storm. But it stood solid, like the woman who lived there. Martha Briggs rose before dawn, same as she had every day for the past 3 years since Thomas died. She was 45 years old, though her hands looked older, calloused and rope-burned, nails cut short and practical. Her dark hair, streaked heavy with grey now, she kept pinned tight at the base of her neck. No fussing with curls or ribbons like the town women did. No time for such things when there were cattle to check, fences to mend, and a ranch to run alone. She stood at the kitchen window, watching the sun break over the eastern ridge, and wrapped her hands around a tin cup of coffee. The wedding ring on her left hand caught the early light, simple gold band, thin from years of wear. She'd never taken it off, not even after they buried Thomas. Some folks in town said that was her clinging to the past. Martha figured it was just habit, same as checking the barn before bed, or counting cattle twice to be sure. Behind her, the kitchen showed signs of a house run by practical necessity rather than decoration. The wood stove dominated one wall. The table where they ate their meals sat square in the center, 4 chairs around it, though only 3 got used now. Her oldest daughter, Sarah, had moved to the small room off the kitchen last year, wanting her independence. Emma, the youngest, still slept upstairs in the room she'd always shared with her sister. "Mom." Emma's voice came soft from the doorway. At 16, she still had some softness to her, hadn't yet been fully hardened by the work that ranch life demanded. She had her father's lighter hair and her mother's strong build. The town ladies whispered about Emma too, said she'd likely end up big like her mother, said it with pity, like it was some kind of curse. "Morning, sweetheart," Martha said, not turning from the window. "Coffee's hot." Emma poured herself a cup and stood beside her mother, both of them looking out at the land that stretched toward the mountains. "Sarah's already in the barn," Emma said. "I heard her go out an hour ago," Martha nodded. Sarah, at 19, had taken her father's death the hardest. She'd gotten angry, stayed angry, threw herself into the ranch work like she was trying to prove something to a man who couldn't see her anymore. Martha understood that kind of grief. She'd carried her own version of it. "We need to ride out and check the north fence line today," Martha said. "Storm last week probably brought down some posts. The bank letter came yesterday," Emma said quietly. "I saw it on your desk." Martha's jaw tightened. She'd hoped the girls hadn't noticed. "Nothing for you to worry about, Mama." Emma turned to face her. "We're not children anymore. We know the ranch is in trouble." Martha finally looked at her daughter, saw the worry in those young eyes, and felt the weight of it. 3 years since Thomas died in that cattle stampede, crushed under 1,000 pounds of panicked beef when a lightning strike spooked the herd. 3 years of Martha trying to hold together what he'd built, to keep the ranch running, to raise 2 daughters alone. 3 years of the town watching, waiting for her to fail. "Cornelius Hayes wants his payment," Martha admitted. "We're 90 days behind on the mortgage. How much do we owe? More than we have. Martha set down her coffee cup. But we'll figure it out. We always do. That was only half true. They'd been scraping by, selling off cattle when they could, but the herd had thinned. They needed more hands to properly work the ranch, but hired men cost money they didn't have. The few ranch hands who'd worked for Thomas had drifted off after his death, unwilling to take orders from a woman or unconvinced she could pay their wages. The town hadn't helped. Red Bluff was the kind of place where reputation mattered more than truth, where gossip spread faster than wildfire and stuck longer. Martha knew what they said about her. She'd heard the whispers at the general store, seen the looks at church. Too big, too loud, too old. The words had reached her ears more than once, usually from Prudence Caldwell and her circle of friends, who seemed to have nothing better to do than judge other people's lives. No man would want her now, they said. Like that was the measure of a woman's worth, whether some man found her desirable. Like she needed wanting, when what she actually needed was help keeping the cattle fed and the fence posts straight. Sarah came in from the barn, dust on her pants and frustration on her face. She was built like her mother. Strong shoulders, capable hands, a frame meant for work, not for the tiny waisted dresses the town women wore. "South paddock fence is down," she announced. "Cattle got into the creek bottom," Martha sighed. "How many?" "Maybe a dozen. I can round them up after breakfast." "I'll help," Martha said. "I can do it myself." Sarah's voice carried that edge it always did now, sharp with the need to prove herself. "I know you can," Martha said gently. "But together we'll do it faster." They ate a quick breakfast of eggs and bread, then headed out to deal with the cattle. The morning work was hot and dusty, the kind of labor that left you bone-tired but satisfied when it was done. Martha watched her daughters work, Sarah fierce and determined, Emma steady and patient, and felt pride mixed with worry. What kind of future could she give them on a failing ranch? What would happen to them if the bank took this land? By noon, they'd corralled the wandering cattle and temporarily patched the fence. Martha stood looking at the repair job, knowing it wouldn't hold more than a few weeks. The whole fence line needed replacing, new posts, new wire. That took money and manpower, neither of which she had. "Mrs. Briggs." A voice called from behind her. She turned to find Sheriff Dutch Milliman riding up on his sorrel mare. Dutch was a good man, fair and honest, one of the few people in town who'd never treated her different after Thomas died. He'd known Thomas, had respected him, and seemed to extend that same respect to Martha. "Afternoon, Dutch," Martha said, wiping sweat from her forehead. "Came out to check on you," he said, dismounting. "Heard Cornelius has been pressing about the mortgage." News traveled fast. "We're managing," Martha said, which wasn't exactly a lie but wasn't quite the truth either. Dutch looked around the ranch, taking in the repairs needed, the work still undone. "Martha, I'm going to speak plain because I respect you too much to dance around it. Victor Stedman's been asking questions about your property." Martha's stomach tightened. Victor Stedman owned the largest spread in the county, ran cattle, and had his fingers in half the businesses in Red Bluff. He was the kind of man who smiled while calculating how to take what you had. "What kind of questions?" "About water rights, mostly. Your creek feeds into his land downstream. He's made noises about wanting to control the whole water flow." Dutch hesitated. "He's also been talking to Hayes at the bank." "Let him talk," Martha said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Just wanted you to know," Dutch said. "If you need anything, legal advice or otherwise, you come find me." After Dutch left, Martha stood in the yard and looked at the ranch her husband had built. The home where she'd raised her daughters, the land that held 20 years of her life. She thought about Thomas's branding iron hanging in the barn, the TB mark he'd designed himself, now barely visible on the old fence posts where the wood had weathered and grayed. That brand was supposed to mean something. It was supposed to last. That evening, as the sun dropped low and painted the sky orange and pink, Martha sat on the front porch with her daughters. Emma sketched in her little journal, drawing the wildflowers that grew along the fence line. Sarah sat quiet, cleaning tack, her hands always needing to be busy. Martha watched the road that led to town, empty as always. She wore Thomas's wedding ring and tried not to think about how much easier this would all be if he was still alive. But thinking like that didn't mend fences or pay debts. She'd learned that grief was a luxury she couldn't afford. So she set her jaw, straightened her spine, and made a silent promise to herself and to her daughters. She would not lose this ranch. Whatever it took, however hard she had to work, she would find a way to keep their home. Even if the whole town had given up on her, even if they whispered she was too much woman for any man to want, she would prove that a woman could stand on her own and hold what was hers. The sun set. The mountains turned purple in the distance, and Martha Briggs prepared herself for another day of the same hard fight. She had no way of knowing that tomorrow morning. Everything would change. The sun hadn't fully cleared the horizon when Martha heard the hoofbeats. She was in the barn, trying to reinforce a beam that had started to sag under the weight of the hayloft above. The work required strength and precision, neither of which came easy when you were working alone, trying to hold a support post steady while hammering it into place. The sound of an approaching horse made her pause. Hammer raised. Visitors were rare out here and rarely brought good news. She set down the hammer and walked to the barn door, shielding her eyes against the morning glare. A man rode toward the ranch from the east, coming down from the direction of the mountains rather than from town. He sat tall in the saddle, leading a pack mule behind him. As he drew closer, Martha could make out more details. He was older, maybe early 50s, with a weathered face that spoke of years spent outdoors. His clothes were practical. Canvas pants, a worn cotton shirt, a wide-brimmed hat that had seen better days. But it was his saddle that caught her attention. Hand-tooled leather. Quality work, but marked with deep scratches that looked like they'd come from claws. Big claws. He stopped his horse about 20 feet from where she stood and sat there a moment as if waiting for permission to come closer. That alone set him apart from most men, who would have ridden right up to the house without a thought. "Morning, ma'am," he said, his voice low and even. "Name's Elias Boone. I'm looking for work." Martha crossed her arms, studying him. He had honest eyes, she'd give him that. Grey-blue, set in a face that had seen hardship but hadn't turned mean from it. His hands on the reins were scarred and capable. "A working man's hands. What kind of work?" she asked. "Whatever needs doing," he said. "I'm handy with carpentry, good with horses and cattle. Can mend fence or fix machinery. I'm not particular, and I work hard. Where you coming from?" He gestured toward the mountains. "We've been up in the high country. Trapping, hunting, living rough for the better part of 15 years. Why come down now?" He was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "Got tired of my own company, I suppose. Figured it was time to see if I still knew how to live among people." Martha appreciated that he didn't try to dress it up with lies or excuses. There was something in his manner that suggested he'd left civilization for a reason and was taking a risk by coming back to it. "I can't pay much," she said. "Can offer meals and a place to sleep in the bunkhouse, maybe a small wage if we get the cattle to market." "That'll do," he said. "You haven't asked what the work is." "Don't need to. Can see it from here." He nodded toward the sagging barn, the broken fence line visible beyond it, the general air of a place struggling under too much work and not enough hands. "Ranch this size needs at least 3 men working it. You're trying to do it alone. I have my daughters." "Didn't mean offense," he said quickly. "Just stating fact. You need help, I need work. Seems like it might suit both of us." Martha wanted to say yes immediately. God knew she needed the help, but caution held her tongue. She didn't know this man. For all she knew, he could be running from the law or worse. The town would have a field day if they heard she'd taken in some strange mountain man. The gossip alone might be worse than the struggle of working alone. As if reading her hesitation, Elias said, "I can give you references if you need them. Sheriff over in Copper Falls knows me. So does the trading post manager in Pine Ridge. I'm not running from anything illegal, if that's your worry." "What are you running from?" He met her eyes. "Grief, mostly. Lost my wife to fever about 16 years back. Couldn't stand to be in the house we'd built together, so I left. Spent a long time in the mountains trying to forget. Didn't work. Finally figured out you can't outrun what's inside you, so might as well stop trying." The honesty in his words struck something in Martha. She understood that kind of grief, the kind that made you want to run or work yourself to exhaustion just to avoid feeling it. "I'm a widow myself," she said. "3 years now." He nodded, a small gesture of shared understanding passing between them. "All right," Martha said. 2 weeks trial. You work hard, act decent, prove yourself. We'll talk about making it permanent. But first sign of trouble or dishonesty, you're gone. And my daughters are off limits for anything but respectful conversation. We clear?" "Crystal clear, Ma'am." "Martha," she said, "if you're going to work here, might as well use my name." "Martha," he repeated, tipping his hat. "Where should I stable my horse?" She showed him to the barn, pointing out the empty stalls. As he unsaddled his horse, she noticed the efficiency of his movements, the way he handled the animal with firm gentleness. The pack mule carried minimal supplies, a bedroll, some cooking gear, a rifle in a worn scabbard, and what looked like traps and pelts wrapped in canvas. "That your handiwork?" she asked, nodding at the saddle with its claw marks. "Mountain Lion took exception to me making camp in what she considered her territory," he said. "She came at the horse first. I managed to drive her off, but not before she got her claws into the leather." "You hunt lions?" "Only when they hunt me first." He looked at her. "I'm not a violent man by nature, Martha, but I've learned to protect what's mine." Something in his tone suggested layers she didn't fully understand yet. But there was no threat in it, just a statement of fact. He had the look of a man who could handle trouble if it came, but wouldn't go looking for it. Sarah appeared in the barn doorway, stopping short when she saw the stranger. Her hand instinctively went to the work knife on her belt. "Mama?" "It's all right," Martha said. "Sarah, this is Elias Boone. He's hired on to help with the ranch work. Elias, this is my eldest daughter, Sarah." Sarah's eyes narrowed, taking in every detail of the man. "Where'd you come from?" "The mountains," Elias said, not seeming offended by her suspicion. "Your mother's given me trial work for 2 weeks. We don't need help," Sarah said, her chin lifting. "Sarah," Martha's voice carried a warning. "We don't," Sarah insisted. "We've been managing fine on our own." Elias finished brushing down his horse before responding. When he did, his voice was mild. "Didn't say you couldn't manage. Just offered to make the managing a bit easier. But if you'd rather I move on, I will. No hard feelings?" His willingness to leave seemed to take some of the fight out of Sarah. She looked at her mother, and Martha could see the conflict there. Pride warring with the knowledge that they genuinely did need help. "He stays," Martha said firmly. 2 weeks' trial. Sarah turned and walked out of the barn without another word. "She's protective," Martha said. "Lost her father young. Doesn't trust easy. Can't blame her for that," Elias said. "World's given her reason to be cautious." Emma came to meet the stranger at lunch, more curious than suspicious. She peppered Elias with questions about the mountains, about the animals he'd seen, about what it was like to live so far from other people. He answered patiently, describing landscapes that sounded almost mythical, peaks that scraped the sky, valleys where elk gathered by the hundreds. Winters so harsh you could freeze solid if you weren't careful. "Did you get lonely?" Emma asked. "Every day," Elias said honestly. "But I wasn't ready to be around people yet. Sometimes a man needs to work through his troubles alone before he can be any good to anyone else." Martha served a simple meal of beans and cornbread, and they ate mostly in silence. She watched Elias from the corner of her eye, noting how he ate with appreciation, but not greed, how he thanked her for the food, how he offered to wash the dishes when they were done. Small gestures, but they spoke to character. After lunch, he asked what she wanted him to start on first. Martha showed him the barn beam that needed reinforcing. Within an hour, he'd assessed the problem, gathered the necessary materials from around the property, and started the repair work. Martha left him to it and went to check on the cattle with Sarah. "You sure about this?" Sarah asked as they rode out. "No," Martha admitted. "But we're running out of options. The bank wants payment in 90 days. We've got fence lines falling apart, and I can't do it all alone no matter how hard I try." "What if he's dangerous?" "Then Sheriff Dutch will help us deal with it." "But Sarah, sometimes you have to take a risk. Sometimes you have to trust that not everyone in the world means you harm. When they returned that evening, the barn beam was reinforced, the whole structure noticeably more stable. Elias had also repaired 3 broken stall doors and organized the scattered tools. He'd worked straight through without break, and the results showed. "Good work," Martha said, and meant it. "Felt good to be useful again," Elias said. "If it's all right, I'll get settled in the bunkhouse now." Martha showed him the small building behind the main barn. It was dusty from disuse. None of the hands had stayed since Thomas died, but structurally sound. "There's a stove if you want to heat it up at night," she said. "Water pump's just outside." "This'll do fine," he said. "I've slept in worse places." As Martha walked back to the house, she saw Sarah watching from the kitchen window. Emma was on the porch, her sketch journal open in her lap. The evening felt different somehow, the air changed by the presence of another person on the property. Martha couldn't say yet if it was a good change or a dangerous one, but she knew that something had shifted. That night, lying in bed, she thought about Elias's words about grief, about running from what's inside you. She looked at the empty space beside her, where Thomas used to sleep, and wondered if she'd been running too, in her own way. Running into work, into exhaustion, into the daily grind that left no room for feeling anything but tired. She thought about the wedding ring on her finger, and for the first time in 3 years, she considered whether wearing it was about honoring Thomas or about hiding behind him. Whether it was love or fear that kept it there. The next morning, Martha woke to find Elias had already started work. He'd drawn water for the horses, mucked out 2 stalls, and was examining the fence posts near the house when she came outside with coffee. "You're an early riser," she said, handing him a cup. "Old habit. Mountains teach you not to waste daylight." He took the coffee gratefully. "These fence posts are rotted at the base. Whole line needs replacing, or you'll have cattle wandering come next storm." "I know," Martha said. "Haven't had time to get to it. I can start on it today if you want. Saw some decent timber in that grove past the creek. Could cut new posts, let them season while I work on other repairs." They fell into a rhythm over the next few days. Elias worked dawn to dusk, tackling the long list of repairs the ranch needed. Martha found herself relaxing slightly, though she kept an eye on him, watching for any sign of the danger Sarah feared. But he proved himself reliable, respectful, and remarkably skilled. He had a way with horses that even Sarah grudgingly admired, and Emma had taken to following him around when her chores were done, asking questions about everything from tracking animals to reading weather signs. On the 4th day, Sheriff Dutch rode out to check on things. Martha saw him talking with Elias by the barn, saw the easy way they conversed. When Dutch came to the house, he had a slight smile on his face. "Checked him out like you asked," Dutch said. "He's legitimate, known in Pine Ridge as honest and hard-working. Sheriff in Copper Falls said Boone helped track down some cattle thieves last year. Wouldn't take any reward. Said he was a man of his word." Martha felt tension she hadn't realized she was holding finally release. "Thank you, Dutch. He also asked me about you," Dutch added. "Wanted to know if there was any man in your life, any complications he should be aware of." "Why would he ask that?" Dutch gave her a knowing look. "Martha, I've known you long enough to speak plain. That man didn't ride down from the mountains randomly. He came looking for something, and I suspect he found it when he saw you. He came looking for work." "That too," Dutch agreed. "But watch yourself. Town's already talking, and you know how Prudence Caldwell gets." As if summoned by the mention of her name, Prudence Caldwell appeared at the ranch 2 days later, ostensibly to bring a basket of preserves, but really to inspect the new hired man. Martha saw through it immediately. "Martha, dear," Prudence said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "I heard you'd taken in a stranger. I felt I should check on you, make sure everything was proper." "Everything's fine, Prudence. Is he living in the house?" The question came with an edge of scandal. "He's in the bunkhouse, same as any hired hand. Still, a single woman with a strange man on the property." "People will talk. People always talk," Martha said flatly. "Usually about things that aren't their business." Prudence's smile tightened. "I'm only thinking of your reputation. And your daughters. You wouldn't want them exposed to unsavory influences. Elias Boone is a decent, hard-working man who's helping me save this ranch. Anyone who has a problem with that can bring it to me directly. After Prudence left, surely racing back to town to spread whatever version of events would make the best gossip. Martha found Elias replacing fence posts in the north pasture. He worked with his shirt sleeves rolled up, sweat on his brow, completely focused on the task. "Town lady came by," Martha said. He paused in his work. "I know, saw her buggy. You want me to leave?" "No," Martha said, surprising herself with the firmness of the answer. "I want you to stay. 2 weeks is almost up, and I'd like to make this permanent if you're willing." Elias set down the post he'd been working on and looked at her directly. "I'm willing, but I need you to know something, Martha. I didn't come down from those mountains just for work. I came because I was tired of being alone, tired of being half a man, hiding from life. I came because I heard about a widow rancher who was fighting to keep her land, and something about that spoke to me, made me think maybe there was still purpose left in this world." Martha's heart beat a little faster. "Elias, I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "Not asking you to feel anything or be anything but what you are. Just wanted you to know why I'm really here. Honest work for honest pay, that's the deal. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't hope for more eventually. That's all. Just hope." Before Martha could respond, Sarah's voice called from the direction of the barn. "Mama, rider coming." They turned to see a man on horseback approaching fast from town. As he got closer, Martha recognized Victor Stedman's foreman, a hard-faced man named Cully. Cully reined up near them, barely nodding at Martha before looking at Elias with open suspicion. "Mrs. Briggs, Mr. Stedman wants to speak with you about a business proposition. He's asked me to escort you to his ranch tomorrow morning." "What kind of proposition?" "Didn't say, ma'am. Just said it was important." After Cully left, Elias said quietly, "You know what he wants, don't you?" "My land," Martha said. "He wants my land." That night, Martha stood on her porch looking at the stars, and Elias joined her without asking permission. They stood in comfortable silence for a while before he spoke. "You don't have to face him alone. I've been facing things alone for 3 years. I know, but you don't have to anymore. If you want company when you meet Stedman, I'll ride with you." Martha looked at him, this man who'd appeared like an answer to a prayer she hadn't known she was praying. "Why?" she asked softly. "Because some fights are worth having," he said, "and some people are worth standing beside." In the darkness, Martha reached out and briefly touched his hand. Just a moment of connection, of gratitude, of something unnamed that was beginning to grow between them. Then she pulled back, still too afraid to let it be more than that. But Elias had felt it too. She could tell by the way he stood a little straighter, the way his voice held a new warmth when he said goodnight. After he'd gone back to the bunkhouse, Martha stood alone on the porch and finally admitted to herself what she'd been denying. She was falling for Elias Boone, slowly, carefully, but undeniably. And that terrified her more than any threat from Victor Stedman or any gossip from Prudence Caldwell, because grief was familiar. Loneliness was familiar. Even struggle was familiar. But hope was dangerous. Hope could break your heart all over again. The first week of Elias Boone's presence on the ranch changed things in ways Martha hadn't anticipated. Not just the visible improvements, though those were undeniable. The barn stood straighter, the fences held firm, the water troughs no longer leaked. But it was the smaller changes that affected her most. The sound of someone working when she woke in the morning, the knowledge that she wasn't carrying every burden alone, the way her daughters responded to having a man around who treated them with respect rather than condescension. Elias worked with the kind of steady competence that came from years of self-reliance. He didn't need instruction or supervision. He'd assess what needed doing, gather what he needed, and get it done. By the end of that first week, he'd accomplished more than Martha had managed in the previous 2 months. She watched him from the kitchen window one morning as he worked with one of the horses in the corral. The mare had been skittish since Thomas died, unwilling to let anyone handle her properly. But Elias moved around her with patient calm, speaking low words Martha couldn't hear, his hands gentle but firm. Within 20 minutes he had a saddle on her, and by the end of the hour he was riding her around the corral as docile as a lamb. "He's good," Sarah said from behind Martha, making her jump slightly. Her daughter had come in so quietly she hadn't heard. Yes, Martha agreed. He is. I still don't trust him completely. But Sarah's voice lacked the sharp edge it had carried before. But I'm starting to think maybe we needed him. That afternoon, Martha asked Elias to ride out with her to check the herd in the upper pasture. They needed to get an accurate count before she could plan how many to bring to market. Sarah stayed behind to work on the vegetable garden, and Emma was inside doing her lessons. Martha insisted both girls keep up their reading and arithmetic, even with all the ranch work. The ride took them through some of the prettiest parts of the property, where the grassland rolled gentle and wildflowers dotted the hillsides. Elias rode easy in the saddle, his eyes constantly scanning the terrain with the awareness of someone who'd spent years reading Land for Survival. Your husband built something good here, Elias said, as they crested a rise and looked down at the grazing cattle below. He did, Martha agreed. Thomas was a hard worker. Drove himself relentlessly, drove everyone around him the same way. That how he died? Driving himself too hard? Partly. Martha kept her eyes on the distant cattle. There was a storm brewing, and he wanted to move the herd before it hit. The hands told him to wait until morning, that it wasn't safe. He wouldn't listen. When the lightning struck, the cattle panicked. He was in the middle of them when they stampeded. I'm sorry. Me too. Martha paused, then added something she'd never said out loud before. But I'm also angry at him. Is that terrible? To be angry at a dead man? No, Elias said quietly. It's honest. Grief isn't just sadness. It's everything mixed together. Love and anger and regret and relief all at once. They rode down toward the cattle and Martha did her count. 43 head, which was fewer than she'd hoped but more than she'd feared. If she could get them all to market and the price was decent, she might be able to make the bank payment. As they were preparing to ride back, Elias pointed to tracks in the soft earth near the creek. You've had visitors. 3 riders within the last day or two. Martha dismounted to look. She could see the hoofprints now that he'd pointed them out, but she wouldn't have noticed them on her own. Rustlers? Maybe, or just folks cutting through your land without permission. He knelt to examine the tracks more closely. They stopped here for a while. See how the prints overlap? They were watching something. The cattle. That'd be my guess. He stood, his face serious. Might want to keep extra watch for a while. Could be someone's planning to help themselves to your herd. The thought sent a chill through Martha. She couldn't afford to lose even 1 head of cattle, let alone multiple animals to thieves. What should we do? I can sleep in the barn for a while, keep an eye out at night. And maybe we should move the herd closer to the house, where they're easier to guard. They spent the rest of the afternoon doing exactly that, driving the cattle down from the upper pasture to a field within sight of the ranch buildings. It was hot work, and by the time they finished, both were covered in dust and sweat. That evening, as Martha was preparing supper, she found herself actually humming, as she worked. She stopped, startled by the realization. When was the last time she'd felt light enough to hum while cooking? The answer came immediately, not since before Thomas died. She looked down at her hands, at the wedding ring that still circled her finger, and for the first time seriously considered taking it off. Not to forget Thomas or dishonor his memory, but because maybe it was time to stop hiding behind the past. Before she could pursue that thought further, she heard raised voices outside. She wiped her hands on her apron and went to the door to find Sarah and Elias in what looked like a serious discussion by the barn. I don't need lessons, Sarah was saying, her arms crossed defensively. I already know how to ride. You know how to stay on a horse, Elias said calmly. That's not the same as riding well. Your seat's all wrong, and you're fighting the horse instead of working with it. You keep riding like that, you're going to get thrown or hurt the animal. My father taught me to ride. I'm sure he did. But he taught you how he rode, and that's not the best way for you. You're built different, balanced different. You need to adjust your technique. Sarah's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Martha was about to intervene when Emma spoke up from the porch. Sarah, why are you being stubborn? If he can help you ride better, why wouldn't you want to learn? Because I'm tired of people acting like I don't know anything. Sarah's voice cracked slightly. Tired of everyone in town looking at us like we're helpless. Tired of needing to be saved. Elias's voice gentled. Sarah, I'm not trying to save you. I'm trying to teach you something useful. There's a difference. Your mama asked me to work here and I'm doing my job. Part of that job, as I see it, is making sure everyone on this ranch is as capable as they can be. That includes you. Something in his tone got through Sarah's defenses. Her shoulders dropped slightly. Fine, show me what I'm doing wrong. For the next half hour, Martha watched as Elias patiently corrected Sarah's riding posture, explaining the mechanics of balance and how to communicate with the horse through subtle shifts of weight and pressure. Sarah listened, tried what he suggested, and Martha could see the difference immediately. Her daughter sat more naturally in the saddle, moved more fluidly with the horse's gait. Better, Elias said when Sarah completed a circuit of the corral. Much better. You've got good instincts. Just needed some refinement. Sarah actually smiled, a real smile, the first Martha had seen in weeks. It does feel different. Easier. That night at supper, the atmosphere was noticeably lighter. Even Sarah seemed more relaxed, asking Elias questions about how he'd learned to track, about what signs to look for when reading the land. Emma chattered about a hawk she'd seen earlier, and Elias listened with genuine interest, offering details about hawk behavior and nesting habits. Martha sat at the head of the table and felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. It took her a moment to identify the feeling. Contentment. This felt like a family sharing a meal, not the strained silence that had characterized most dinners for the past 3 years, but actual warmth and connection. After the girls had gone upstairs, Martha and Elias remained at the table, drinking coffee and talking in low voices. She told him about her concerns regarding the market, about whether the cattle would bring enough money. He listened without interrupting, then offered practical suggestions about timing and buyers. There's a cattle broker in Copper Falls who deals fair, he said. Pays better than the buyers here in Red Bluff. It's a longer drive, but might be worth it. How long? 10 days, maybe 12 with the herd we've got. Rough country in places, but manageable. Martha considered this. A cattle drive would mean leaving the ranch, taking her daughters along, being gone for potentially 3 weeks when she counted the return trip. But if it meant better prices and enough money to save the ranch, I'd go with you, Elias said, reading her thoughts. Help drive the cattle, make sure you get there safe. Why would you do that? He met her eyes across the table. Because that's what partners do, Martha. They help each other. We're not partners. You're my hired hand. Is that all I am? The question hung in the air between them. Weighted with implications, neither was quite ready to speak aloud. Martha felt her heart beating faster, felt the pull of something she'd thought was dead inside her. I don't know what you are, she said honestly. I don't know what any of this is. That's all right, Elias said softly. We don't have to know yet. We just have to keep going. Later that night, Martha was in the barn checking on one of the horses when she found Thomas's old work gloves tucked on a shelf. She picked them up, running her fingers over the worn leather. They still held the shape of his hands, the creases and indentations from years of gripping reins and tools. She'd saved them without really knowing why, unable to throw them away, but also unable to use them. She heard footsteps and turned to find Elias in the doorway. Sorry, he said. Saw the lantern. Wanted to make sure everything was all right. I'm fine, she said, but her voice broke slightly on the words. He came closer, saw the gloves in her hands. Those his? She nodded. I keep finding pieces of him everywhere. In the tools he used, the marks he left on the wood, the way the gate hangs slightly crooked because he never fixed it properly. She looked up at Elias. How do you move forward when the past is everywhere you look? You don't move past it, Elias said. You carry it with you, but you make room for new things too. That's what I learned in the mountains. You can't outrun grief or guilt or loss. But you can decide that those things don't get to be all you are. Martha set the gloves back on the shelf. Were you running from guilt? Is that why you went to the mountains? Yes. He didn't elaborate immediately, and she didn't push. Finally, he continued. Rebecca, my wife, she got sick with fever. I rode 2 days to fetch a doctor, but by the time we got back, she was gone. I kept thinking if I'd ridden faster, left sooner, done something different. He stopped, his jaw tight. Took me a long time to accept that some things happen regardless of what we do, that we're not as powerful as we think we are. I'm sorry, Martha said. Me too. He looked at her, and in the lamplight his face showed every year he'd lived, every hardship he'd endured. But I'm done apologizing for being alive when she's not. Done punishing myself. That's what living alone in the mountains was, punishment. I'm ready to stop now. Martha understood exactly what he meant. She'd been punishing herself too, in her own way. Working herself to exhaustion, refusing help, wearing loneliness like armor. All because some part of her felt guilty for surviving when Thomas hadn't. Guilty for the relief she'd felt when the argument stopped. When she no longer had to try to be enough for a man who seemed perpetually disappointed. I should go, Elias said, turning toward the door. Elias? He stopped. Thank you. For everything. For the work, yes, but also for... She searched for the right words. For seeing me. Not the widow, not the burden, not the woman the town has decided I am. Just me, he smiled, and it transformed his whole face. Easy to see, Martha. You shined pretty bright when you let yourself. After he'd gone back to the bunkhouse, Martha stood alone in the barn for a long time, holding that compliment close. When was the last time someone had said something kind about her, not about what she could do or provide, but about who she was? She thought about Elias's offer to help with the cattle drive, thought about what it might mean to accept his partnership, to truly let him in. It scared her, the vulnerability, the risk, the possibility of loss all over again. But standing there in the barn, surrounded by the ghosts of her past, Martha made a decision. She would make the cattle drive. She would accept Elias's help. And she would stop wearing fear like a shield. Tomorrow, she would start planning. Tonight, she would let herself feel the smallest spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. She extinguished the lantern and walked back to the house through the darkness. And for the first time in 3 years, the night didn't feel quite so empty. 3 days into the cattle drive, Martha understood why Thomas had always spoken of these journeys with a mixture of pride and exhaustion. Every muscle in her body ached from dawn to dusk in the saddle. Dust coated her clothes, her skin, worked its way into her hair, no matter how tightly she braided it. The cattle moved with their own stubborn logic, wandering off toward any interesting plant or stream, requiring constant vigilance to keep the herd together. But despite the hardship, Martha felt more alive than she had in years. The landscape changed as they climbed higher into the foothills. The grass grew shorter, tougher. Stands of pine appeared, darkening the hillsides. The air grew thinner, cooler, carrying hints of the snow-capped peaks still visible in the distance. They were following an old cattle route that wound through the easiest passes, but easiest was a relative term when dealing with mountain terrain. Emma had taken to the journey with surprising enthusiasm. During the midday rest breaks, when the cattle grazed and the humans caught their breath, she would pull out her small sketch journal and draw. Wildflowers that dotted the high meadows, the way the mountains layered against each other in shades of blue and purple. A hawk riding the thermals overhead. Let me see, Martha said. Settling down beside her daughter during one such break, Emma showed her the latest sketch, a surprisingly detailed rendering of the landscape they'd just traversed. The cattle small figures against vast hills. This is beautiful, honey, Martha said. You've got real talent. Papa always said drawing was a waste of time, Emma said quietly. Said I should focus on practical things. Martha felt a familiar pang of complicated grief. Thomas had been a good man in many ways, but he'd had rigid ideas about what was valuable and what wasn't. Art, music, anything that didn't directly contribute to the ranch's productivity, he'd dismissed them all. Your papa was wrong about that, Martha said firmly. Beauty matters. Creating something that helps people see the world differently, that's not a waste. That's a gift. Elias approached, leading his horse to water at the nearby creek. He glanced at Emma's journal. May I? Emma handed it to him. and he flipped through the pages with careful respect. His face showed genuine appreciation. "These are remarkable," he said. "You've captured the light on the mountains perfectly. And this one," he pointed to a sketch of a deer standing in morning mist. "I've seen this exact moment. You didn't just draw what it looked like. You drew what it felt like." Emma's face flushed with pleasure.
Really?
"Really?" He handed the journal back. "In the mountains I met a trapper once who couldn't read or write, but he could draw. He'd map routes, mark dangerous areas, record animal movements, all through pictures. Those drawings saved my life more than once when I was learning the territory. Your skill isn't frivolous, Emma. It's another way of seeing and understanding the world." Martha watched the exchange and felt warmth spread through her chest. Elias had a gift for seeing people clearly, for understanding what they needed to hear. He'd done it with Sarah when teaching her to ride better. Now he was doing it with Emma, validating something Thomas had dismissed. That evening, they made camp in a sheltered valley where the creek ran wide and shallow. Elias showed the girls how to set up a proper camp, where to put the fire for best protection from wind, how to arrange bedrolls, how to secure the horses so they wouldn't wander, but could break free if a predator attacked. "You're a good teacher," Sarah said grudgingly, as she helped stake down the canvas shelter they'd brought for the girls to sleep under. "Had to learn everything the hard way," Elias replied. "Makes you remember the lessons better when you nearly freeze to death or lose your supplies to a bear. Figured I could save you some of that trial and error." As the fire crackled and their simple dinner cooked, the four of them sat in a rough circle. The cattle were bedded down nearby, their shapes dark lumps in the gathering dusk. The sky above was vast and clear, stars already beginning to appear, though full darkness was still an hour away. "Tell us a story," Emma said to Elias, "about the mountains." He thought for a moment, then began. "There was a winter about 8 years back when the snow came early and hard. I was up in high country, not quite ready to descend to my winter camp. Got caught by a storm that dropped 4 feet of snow in less than a day. What did you do?" Emma leaned forward, captivated. "Made a shelter, best I could. A snow cave, basically. Dug into a drift and waited it out. Had enough food for maybe 3 days, if I was careful. Storm lasted 5. You must have been terrified," Sarah said. "First day, yes. Second day, angry at myself for getting caught. Third day," he paused, his face thoughtful. "Third day, I got quiet inside. Realized that all my fear and anger weren't changing the situation. The storm didn't care how I felt about it. So I stopped fighting against what was and started just being in it." "That sounds like giving up," Sarah said. "No, giving up would have been lying down and waiting to die. What I did was accept that I couldn't control the storm, but I could control how I responded to it. So I stayed calm, rationed my food carefully, kept my shelter maintained, and waited. Storm passed on the 6th day. I was weak and hungry, but I walked out alive." Martha understood what he was really saying. It was a lesson about more than surviving storms. It was about the difference between acceptance and defeat, between adapting and surrendering. "Is that when you learned to be so patient?" Emma asked. Elias smiled. "I learned a lot of things in those mountains. Patience was one, but maybe the most important thing I learned was that being alone isn't the same as being strong. I survived that storm, yes, but surviving isn't the same as living." He looked at Martha as he said it, and she felt the weight of his gaze. He was talking about more than winter storms now. He was talking about the choice to come down from the mountain, to risk connection again, to try living instead of just surviving. The conversation shifted to lighter topics, Sarah asking about tracking techniques, Emma wanting to know about mountain flowers. But Martha stayed quiet, thinking about Elias's words. She'd been surviving too these past 3 years, working herself to exhaustion, keeping her daughters safe, holding on to the ranch. But had she been living? Later, after the girls had gone to bed under their canvas shelter, Martha and Elias sat by the fire, keeping watch. The night was cool at this elevation, comfortable rather than cold. Above them, the stars blazed with an intensity impossible to see from lower elevations. "Thank you," Martha said, "for what you said to Emma about her drawing. I meant every word. I know That's why it mattered, she paused. Thomas wasn't a bad man. I never thought he was, but he was hard. He saw the world in very specific terms, useful or not useful, practical or frivolous. He loved us, I know he did. But he didn't always know how to show it in ways we needed. Elias fed another piece of wood to the fire. My Rebecca was like sunlight. Everything she touched felt warmer, brighter. I loved her desperately. But I also realize now that I made her carry all the emotional weight in our marriage. I was so focused on building our homestead, on being successful, that I forgot to just be present with her. When she died, I tortured myself thinking about all the moments I'd missed, all the times I'd chosen work over sitting with her. Is that why you're so good at seeing people? Martha asked. Because you learned what happens when you don't? Maybe. He looked at her directly. Or maybe it's because I recognize the same loneliness in others that I carried in myself. You've been lonely, Martha, even before Thomas died, I think. You've been going through the motions of life without anyone really seeing you. She wanted to deny it, but the truth of his words hit too close. How do you know that? Because I see you now, and I see how surprised you are every time someone acknowledges who you are, instead of just what you can do for them. Martha felt tears sting her eyes. She turned her face away, not wanting him to see how deeply his words affected her. But Elias shifted closer, his hand coming to rest gently on her shoulder. It's all right to want to be seen, he said quietly. It's all right to want someone to choose you, not because they need what you can provide, but because they value who you are. I don't know how to want that anymore, Martha whispered. I don't know how to be anything other than useful. Then maybe we learn together, Elias said. Because I've spent 16 years being useful to no one, living for nothing but my own survival. I don't know how to be part of something larger than myself anymore. But I want to learn. They sat in silence after that, shoulders touching, watching the fire burn low. Around them the night was full of sounds, the cattle shifting and breathing, the creek running its endless course, an owl calling from the pines. Martha felt something loosening in her chest. Some knot of tension she'd carried so long she'd forgotten it was there. Maybe Elias was right. Maybe they could learn together how to live again instead of just surviving. The next morning, they woke to discover 2 cattle had wandered off during the night. Sarah spotted the missing animals first during the dawn count, and her face went tight with worry. Could be they just drifted, Elias said, studying the ground. Or could be someone encouraged them to drift. He pointed to tracks near where the cattle had been bedded down. Boot prints, human, recent. Someone had walked right through their camp while they slept, close enough to touch the cattle. Why didn't we hear them? Sarah demanded. Because they were good at being quiet, Elias said grimly. Professional, most likely. They took 2 cattle as a message. We can take what we want, and you can't stop us. Was it those rustlers from before? Emma asked, her voice small. Possibly. Or someone working for Victor Stedman. Martha felt anger rising. Either way, we're not giving up 2 head without a fight. Can we track them? Elias studied the tracks, following them with his eyes across the terrain. They drove the cattle north toward rougher country. It'll slow us down to go after them, maybe cost us a day. With your bank deadline, we're not leaving them, Martha said firmly. Those cattle represent the difference between making the mortgage payment and losing the ranch. We track them down and we get them back. Sarah's face showed approval. Emma looked worried but determined. Elias nodded slowly. All right. Sarah, you and Emma stay with the main herd. Keep them in this valley. Martha and I will track the missing cattle. They saddled fresh horses and followed the tracks north. The rustlers, or whoever had taken the cattle, hadn't bothered to hide their trail. Either they were confident they wouldn't be followed, or they wanted to draw Martha and Elias away from the main herd. This could be a trap, Elias said as they rode. Split us up, leave your daughters vulnerable. Sarah's armed, and she knows how to use a rifle. Emma's smart enough to stay close to her sister. They'll be fine for a few hours. The trail led them up a narrow canyon, the walls rising steep on either side. It was exactly the kind of place where an ambush would be easy to execute. Elias rode with his hand near his rifle, his eyes constantly scanning the ridgeline above. They found the two cattle in a box canyon, guarded by a single man, not one of the rustlers from before, but a younger fellow who looked more nervous than dangerous. When he saw Martha and Elias approach, he actually looked relieved. "You the widow Briggs?" he called out. "I am. Those are my cattle you're holding." "Yeah, I know. Look, I was paid to take them, but I didn't know you'd come after them yourself. I thought—" He stopped, seeming to realize how foolish he sounded. "You thought what?" Elias asked. "That a woman wouldn't have the courage to track her own property?" "Something like that." The young man shifted uncomfortably. "Man paid me $5 to drive these two off and hold them here for a day. Said it was a prank, nothing serious. Who paid you?" Martha demanded. Didn't give a name. "But he had money, good clothes. Looked like a rancher or businessman." "Victor Stedman," Martha said with certainty. The young man didn't confirm or deny it, but his face told her she was right. "Look, I don't want trouble. Take your cattle and go. I'll tell whoever hired me that you got past me. Or," Elias said, his voice hard, "you could tell whoever hired you that Martha Briggs isn't someone to trifle with, that she tracked down her property, got it back, and made it clear that anyone who tries to interfere with her again will regret it." The young man nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. I'll do that." They drove the two cattle back to camp, arriving by mid-afternoon. Sarah and Emma had kept the main herd together without incident. As they integrated the recovered animals back into the group, Martha felt a surge of satisfaction. Stedman, or whoever was behind this, had tried to slow them down, to make them doubt themselves. Instead, they'd proven they could fight back and win. That night around the campfire, Martha told her daughters what had happened. "People will try to stop us," she said. "They'll try to make us afraid or convince us to give up. But we're stronger than they think. We're stronger than maybe even we thought we were." She looked at each of them, Sarah fierce and proud, Emma young but brave, Elias steady and true. This makeshift family, bound together by necessity and growing into something more. "We're going to make it to Copper Falls," Martha said. "We're going to sell these cattle for a fair price. And we're going to save our home, because that's what we do. We don't quit." Around her, three voices answered in agreement. And as the fire burned and the stars wheeled overhead, Martha felt something she hadn't felt in years, the absolute certainty that she wasn't fighting alone anymore. By the 8th day of the drive, the landscape had transformed completely. They were deep in mountain country now, following creek beds through narrow valleys, climbing switchback trails that made Martha's stomach clench with fear for the cattle. One wrong step, and an animal could tumble down the steep slopes. But Elias guided them surely, choosing paths with the confidence of someone who knew this terrain intimately. The weather had turned as well. Morning frost coated the grass, and their breath came in visible clouds. At this elevation, summer was a fleeting thing, and autumn waited in the wings, ready to sweep down from the peaks. They'd been lucky so far. No major storms, no serious accidents. But Martha knew their luck wouldn't hold forever. Emma had become quieter as the journey progressed, her initial enthusiasm tempered by exhaustion and the constant awareness of how much depended on their success. But she still found moments of beauty to capture in her journal. During their midday rest on the 8th day, she sat apart from the others, carefully drawing something in her small book. When she finished, she tore out the page with unusual deliberation and brought it to Martha. "For you, Mama." It was a wildflower, rendered in careful detail, the delicate petals, the way the stem curved, even the small imperfections that made it real rather than idealized. But Emma had done something extra. She'd pressed an actual wildflower onto the page, preserving it flat against the paper. "It's beautiful," Martha said, her voice catching. "I wanted you to have something to remember this time," Emma said. "Not just the hard parts, but the beautiful parts too. Because even though we're scared and tired and everything's uncertain, there's still beauty here. I don't want us to forget that." Martha pulled her daughter into a tight embrace. "I won't forget. I promise." That afternoon, as they pushed the herd through a particularly narrow passage between two rock faces, Sarah's horse stumbled. It happened fast. One moment she was riding steady, The next, the horse's front leg went down in a hidden depression, and Sarah was airborne. Thrown forward over the animal's head, she hit the ground hard and lay still. "Sarah!" Martha was off her horse and running before she'd consciously decided to move. Elias reached Sarah first, kneeling beside her with quick, efficient movements, checking for injuries with hands that knew what they were doing. "Don't move," he said, as Sarah started to push herself up. "Let me check you first." "I'm fine," Sarah gasped, but her face was pale and she was holding her left arm awkwardly. Elias gently examined her arm, his fingers probing carefully. "Not broken, but you've got a bad sprain. Maybe a slight fracture in the wrist. Either way, you need to rest it." "I can't rest it," Sarah protested. "We need every hand for the drive." "You're not doing anyone good if you make the injury worse," Elias said firmly. He looked up at Martha. "She needs to ride in the supply wagon for at least a day. Keep that arm immobilized and elevated." They made camp early that day, setting up in a protected spot where a stand of pines provided shelter from the wind that had kicked up. Elias fashioned a sling for Sarah's arm from a spare shirt, then showed Emma how to wrap it properly to provide support. Sarah sat by the fire, frustration radiating from every line of her body. She hated being sidelined, hated feeling useless. Martha understood that feeling all too well. "It's not your fault," Martha told her daughter, sitting down beside her. The horse stumbled. "Could have happened to any of us. But it happened to me," Sarah said bitterly. "And now you and Elias have to do my work on top of your own. We'll manage." "We always do. That's what you always say. We'll manage." "But when do we get to do more than just manage, Mama? When do things get easier?" Martha didn't have an answer for that. The truth was, she didn't know if things would ever get easier. Maybe this was just life. One challenge after another, and all you could do was keep putting one foot in front of the other. Elias brought Sarah a cup of coffee and a plate of food, then sat down on her other side. "You know what I learned in the mountains?" he said. "Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is accept help. Took me years to figure that out. I kept thinking that needing anyone else was a weakness. But strength isn't about never needing help. It's about knowing when to accept it." Sarah looked at him, then at her mother, and some of the tension drained from her shoulders. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly. "What if we don't make it in time? What if all this effort is for nothing?" "Then we'll deal with that when it happens," Martha said. "But we're not there yet. Right now we're here, we've still got our cattle, and we're still moving forward. That's enough for today." That night, as the temperature dropped and the fire burned low, Sarah finally broke down. It started with tears she tried to hide, then became full sobs she couldn't control. Martha held her oldest daughter while she cried out all the fear and frustration and exhaustion she'd been carrying. "I miss him," Sarah cried. "I miss Papa, and I'm angry at him for dying, and I'm scared we're going to lose everything, and I don't know how to be strong enough for all of this." "You don't have to be," Martha said. "You're 19 years old, Sarah. You've already been stronger than anyone should have to be. It's all right to not have all the answers. It's all right to be scared." Emma came and joined the embrace, and then, after a moment's hesitation, so did Elias. The four of them sat huddled together by the fire, holding each other up, and Martha realized this was what family really meant. Not perfection or constant strength, but being there for each other when the strength ran out. The next morning, Sarah rode in the wagon as ordered, though she clearly hated every minute of it. But Martha noticed how Elias checked on her regularly, how Emma stayed close, bringing her sister water and food without being asked. They were taking care of each other, this makeshift family of theirs. The trail grew steeper as they approached the high passes. The cattle struggled with the climb, needing frequent rests. It slowed their pace considerably, eating into their timeline. Martha did calculations in her head, trying to figure if they'd still make it to Copper Falls with enough time to get back before Hayes's deadline. It would be close, dangerously close. On the 10th day, they reached the summit of the pass. From there, they could see the valley beyond, greener, lower, easier terrain. Copper Falls was still 3 days away, but the hardest part of the journey was behind them. "We're going to make it," Emma said, standing beside Martha and looking down at the valley. "Yes," Martha said, and let herself believe it. We are. That night, they camped at the edge of the high country, preparing for the descent that would begin tomorrow. The cattle were tired but intact. Sarah's arm was healing. They'd lost no more animals to rustlers or accidents. Against all odds, they were succeeding. As Martha lay in her bedroll looking up at the stars, she thought about what Emma had said earlier, about remembering not just the hard parts, but the beautiful ones too. This journey had been both. The fear and exhaustion, yes, but also the moments of connection, the small victories, the growing bond between four people who'd chosen to stand together. She thought about the pressed wildflower Emma had given her, now carefully tucked into her saddlebag. A reminder that even in the midst of struggle, beauty persists, that hope can bloom in unlikely places. And she thought about Elias sleeping nearby, keeping watch even in his sleep. This man who'd come down from the mountain looking for purpose and had found it in helping them, who saw her not as a burden or a project, but as a person worth knowing. Martha touched the wedding ring on her left hand, the one she'd worn for 3 years since Thomas died. For the first time, she could imagine taking it off, not to forget Thomas or dishonor his memory, but to acknowledge that she was still alive, still capable of moving forward, still allowed to want things for herself. She wasn't ready yet, but she was getting closer. The stars wheeled slowly overhead, ancient and unchanging, and Martha let sleep take her. Tomorrow they would descend into the valley. Tomorrow they would get closer to Copper Falls and the sail that would determine their future. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight, wrapped in blankets under a mountain sky, surrounded by her daughters and the man who'd chosen to stand with them, Martha Briggs let herself rest. They reached Copper Falls on the 13th day, driving the cattle into the holding pens at the edge of town just as the sun reached its zenith. Martha was bone-tired, covered in trail dust, and more nervous than she'd been in years. Everything depended on the next few hours, whether Augustus Kimball would offer a fair price, whether it would be enough to save the ranch. The town was larger than Red Bluff, more prosperous. Well-maintained buildings lined wide streets. The cattle pens were professionally constructed, and Martha could see several other herds already penned, waiting for sale. This was a real cattle market, not just a backwater transaction. "You three stay with the herd," Martha told her daughters and Elias. "I'll find Kimball and set up the sale." "I should come with you," Elias said. "No," Martha's voice was firm. "This is my ranch, my cattle, my negotiation. I need to do this part myself." She saw understanding dawn in Elias's eyes. This wasn't about not trusting him or not wanting his help. This was about Martha proving to herself that she could stand on her own when it mattered most. "We'll be here," he said simply. Martha walked into town, following directions to Kimball's office. She was conscious of how she must look, trail-worn, dusty, a woman alone in a cattle town. But she held her head high. She'd driven 43 head of cattle through mountain passes and fought off rustlers. She could handle one cattle broker. Augustus Kimball's office was above the mercantile, a neat space with ledgers lining the walls and a large desk dominating the center. Kimball himself was a surprise. A small, precise man with spectacles and ink-stained fingers. He looked more like a clerk than a cattle broker. "Mrs. Briggs," he said, standing when she entered. "Elias Boone sent word you might be coming. Please sit." Martha lowered herself into the chair across from his desk, grateful to be off her feet. "You know Elias?" "Known him for years. Good man, honest. When he sent word that he was helping a widow drive cattle to market, I made sure to keep an eye out for you." Kimball opened a ledger. "How many head?" 43. Mixed ages, good condition despite the drive. I'll need to inspect them, of course. But assuming they're as described, I can offer you $28 a head." Martha's heart leaped. $28 was better than she'd dared hope. 43 head at that price would give her, she did quick mathematics in her head, over $1,200. Not quite enough for the full mortgage payment, but close. So close. "That's a fair price," she said carefully. "When can you inspect them?" "This afternoon." "If they check out, I can have payment for you by tomorrow morning. Cash or bank draft, your preference?" "Cash," Martha said immediately. She didn't trust banks anymore, not after what Hayes had done. They shook hands, and Martha walked back toward the cattle pens, feeling lighter than she had in months. $1,200. Combined with what she'd saved, she might have enough. It would be incredibly tight, but it might work. She found her small family waiting by the pens. Emma was sketching the town buildings. Sarah sat with her arms still in its sling, looking frustrated but healing. Elias stood watching the cattle, his posture relaxed but alert. "How'd it go?" he asked when Martha approached. $28 a head, pending inspection this afternoon. Elias's face broke into a genuine smile. "That's excellent, Martha. Better than I hoped. It's not quite enough," she admitted. "But it's close. Maybe close enough." They spent the afternoon at the pens, while Kimball and his assistant inspected each animal. Martha watched anxiously as they examined hooves, teeth, checked for disease or injury. But the cattle had come through the drive in good shape, and Kimball nodded approval as he made notes in his ledger. "Fine herd," he told Martha when the inspection was complete. "I'll have payment ready at 9 tomorrow morning." That evening, they took rooms at a boarding house, a luxury after nearly 2 weeks of sleeping on the ground. Martha insisted the girls share one room while she took another. Elias got a third room down the hall. They'd earned this small comfort. Martha soaked in a real bath for the first time since leaving home, washing away the trail dust and exhaustion. She put on her one clean dress and braided her damp hair. When she looked in the mirror, she saw someone she almost didn't recognize, worn but strong, tired but determined. A woman who'd accomplished something remarkable. They gathered for dinner at the boarding house dining room, all 4 of them cleaned up and looking more civilized. The meal was simple but felt like a feast after trail food: roast chicken, vegetables, fresh bread. Emma actually laughed at something Elias said, a sound Martha had almost forgotten. "Tomorrow we get the money," Sarah said. "Then we ride back?" "Fast as we can," Martha confirmed. "We've got maybe 5 days before Hayes' deadline. It'll be close, but we can make it." After dinner, Martha walked out onto the boarding house porch, needing air and space to think. She was so close to saving everything. So close to proving that she could hold on to what was hers without surrendering to men like Victor Stedman or Cornelius Hayes. Elias found her there, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He offered her one without speaking, and they stood side by side, watching the street below. Copper Falls was quieter than Red Bluff, more orderly. Street lamps glowed in the gathering darkness. "You did it," Elias said finally. "You drove those cattle through country that would have stopped most men. You tracked down rustlers. You kept your daughters safe. You did everything you set out to do." "We did it," Martha corrected. "I couldn't have done this without you, Elias. You know that." "Maybe, but you would have tried anyway." "That's who you are." They were quiet for a moment, then Elias said, "Martha, I need to tell you something. About why I really came to Red Bluff, about who I was before the mountains." Martha turned to look at him, hearing something in his voice, a weight. A confession preparing itself. "I told you I went to the mountains after Rebecca died," he continued. "But I didn't tell you everything. I didn't tell you what I was running from. You don't have to." "I do. Because if we're going to—" He stopped, started again. "During the war, I served with a cavalry unit in Missouri. We did things, terrible things. I followed orders I shouldn't have followed. I hurt people who didn't deserve hurting. After the war ended, I tried to forget, tried to build a normal life with Rebecca. But the ghosts followed me." He stared out into the darkness, his voice hollow. "When she died, I took it as judgment. Thought maybe God was punishing me for what I'd done. So I ran to the mountains to punish myself further. Spent 16 years living like a hermit, like I didn't deserve human connection or comfort. Elias, I'm not that man anymore," he said urgently. "I've spent years trying to be better, trying to atone. But you deserve to know the truth before—" He stopped, unable to finish. Martha set down her coffee and turned to face him fully. "Before what?" "Before you let me be part of your life. Before your daughters start to depend on me. Before—" He met her eyes. "Before I tell you that I've fallen in love with you and want to stay, not just until the ranch is saved, but after. For however long you'll have me." Martha's breath caught. She'd known on some level that feelings were growing between them. But hearing him say it out loud, Hearing the vulnerability in his voice made it real in a way it hadn't been before. "I don't care about your past," she said softly. "I care about who you are now. And the man you are now is someone who came down from a mountain to help a widow he'd never met, who's been patient and kind with my daughters, who sees me as a person, not just as someone to be pitied or used." "Martha, I'm not ready," she interrupted. "I'm not ready to take off my wedding ring or make promises about the future. But I'm not ready either, if that makes sense. I'm somewhere in between, and I need you to be patient with that." "I can be patient," Elias said. "I've got nothing but time, and nowhere else I'd rather be." They stood close together on the porch, not quite touching, but near enough to feel each other's warmth. Martha felt something shifting inside her, some old barrier beginning to crack. "When we get home," she said, "when the ranch is saved and things settle down, maybe then we can figure out what this is, what we could be." "I'd like that." They went back inside shortly after, parting at their respective doors with small smiles and unspoken promises. Martha lay in her bed that night, feeling something she'd thought was gone forever. Anticipation for the future, not just dread of what might go wrong. She woke the next morning to pounding on her door. Sarah's voice, urgent and frightened. "Mama!" "Come quick!" Martha threw on her dress and rushed into the hall. Sarah stood there, her face pale. "It's Elias. Someone attacked him. He's hurt." They found him in his room, sitting on the edge of the bed, holding a cloth to his head. Blood seeped through the fabric. His room had been ransacked, belongings scattered, furniture overturned. "What happened?" Martha demanded, kneeling beside him. "Someone came in during the night," Elias said, his voice tight with pain. "Hit me from behind while I was sleeping. When I came to, they were gone." "Gone with what?" But Martha already knew, her stomach dropping. Elias met her eyes, and she saw guilt and fury warring in his face. "The money for the cattle sale. I had it in my saddlebag for safekeeping. They took it all." The words hit Martha like a physical blow. "The money. The $1,200 that was supposed to save her ranch. Gone." "No," she whispered. No. I'm sorry," Elias said, and she could hear his voice breaking. "Martha, I'm so sorry. I should have been more careful, should have—" "It's not your fault," she said automatically, but her mind was reeling. Without that money she had nothing. All the struggle, all the danger, the entire cattle drive, for nothing. "We go to the sheriff," Sarah said. "Report the theft. They can track the thieves." "There's no time," Martha said dully. "We're 5 days from home. Hayes's deadline is in 6 days. Even if they caught the thieves today, we couldn't get the money back and make it home in time." The full weight of defeat pressed down on her. She'd done everything right. She'd taken the risk, made the drive, sold the cattle. And still it wasn't enough. Still she was going to lose. "There has to be something we can do," Emma said, tears streaming down her face. But Martha couldn't think of anything. The money was gone. The deadline was immovable. The ranch, her home, her daughter's future, everything Thomas had built was going to slip through her fingers. Elias stood, swaying slightly from the head wound. "My savings, the $1,500 I told you about, it's hidden at the ranch in the bunkhouse. We can use that." "That's your money," Martha said. "It's money," Elias corrected. "And money's no good if you don't use it for something that matters. Your ranch matters. Your daughter's future matters. You matter, Martha. It still might not be enough. And even if it is, we have to get back in time." "Then we ride hard," Elias said. "We leave right now, push the horses, travel day and night if we have to. We can make it in 4 days if we don't stop." Martha looked at her daughters. Sarah fierce despite her injury, Emma frightened but determined. She looked at Elias, blood still on his face, offering everything he had without hesitation. She thought about the ranch, the home she'd fought so hard to keep, and she made a decision. "We ride," she said. "Right now, we don't stop for anything. We get home, we get Elias's money, and we pay Hayes before his deadline. We're not done fighting yet." They gathered their few belongings, saddled horses that were still tired from the drive out, and left Copper Falls within the hour. Martha took one last look at the town that had nearly represented salvation before becoming the site of their greatest setback, but she didn't let herself wallow in despair. Not yet. They still had a chance, however slim. And Martha Briggs didn't quit while there was still breath in her body and miles left to cover. The race was on. The week following the town meeting passed in a blur of legal proceedings and paperwork. Dutch and a lawyer from Copper Falls, hired with some of the extra money the town had contributed, worked to untangle the mess Stedman had created. The foreclosure was officially halted pending investigation into Stedman's business practices. True to the community's word, the money they'd pledged came through. Martha stood in the bank, no longer managed by Cornelius Hayes, who'd quietly resigned and left town, and made the full payment on her mortgage. The feeling of handing over that money, of watching the debt marked as paid in full, was almost overwhelming. "It's done," the new bank manager said, stamping the final document. "The ranch is yours, free and clear, Mrs. Briggs." Martha walked out of the bank with the paid mortgage document in her hands. Sarah and Emma waited outside, and all three of them stood on the wooden sidewalk, looking at the paper that represented years of struggle finally resolved. "We did it," Sarah said, her voice full of wonder. "We actually did it." "We did," Martha agreed. She looked at her daughters, both of them stronger for what they'd endured, both of them braver than anyone should have to be at their ages. "I'm proud of you both. Your father would be proud too." They returned to the ranch to find Elias had been busy. He'd spent the week catching up on repairs that had been neglected during their absence, but he'd also done something more. Above the main gate leading to the property, he'd hung a new sign. Freshly carved wood, the letters burnt deep into the grain. "Briggs Boone Ranch," it read. Martha stared at the sign, her heart in her throat. Elias, he came out of the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. "I know we haven't talked about it officially," he said. "And I know you're not ready for everything, but I wanted you to know that I see this as a partnership, equal. Your ranch, but also mine now, if you'll have me." Martha walked up to him slowly. Behind her, she heard Sarah and Emma quietly retreating to the house, giving them privacy. She stopped in front of Elias, looking up into his weathered, honest face. "I took off Thomas's ring," she said quietly. "Well, I moved it to my right hand, because I'm not trying to forget him or pretend he never existed. But I'm also not going to keep hiding behind him." Elias's eyes searched her face. "What are you saying, Martha?" "I'm saying that I'm ready," Martha said. "Maybe not for everything all at once, but ready to try, ready to let someone in. Ready to—" she took a breath. "Ready to accept that partnership you're offering, in the ranch and in whatever else might grow between us." "Martha," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I need you to be sure. I need you to know that I'm not offering to save you or rescue you. I'm offering to stand beside you as an equal." "I know," Martha said. "That's exactly what I want." He reached out slowly, giving her every chance to pull back, and cupped her face in his work-roughened hands. "I'm going to kiss you now," he said. "If that's all right." "It's more than all right," Martha whispered. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, two people who'd been hurt before moving carefully toward something new. But it deepened naturally, becoming a promise of possibilities, of partnership, of two damaged people choosing to try again. When they pulled apart, Martha was smiling. Actually smiling, broad and genuine, in a way she hadn't in years. "So the sign stays?" Elias asked. "The sign stays," Martha confirmed. "Partners, partners," he agreed. That evening, they gathered for dinner as they had so many times before. But everything felt different now, lighter. Sarah and Emma chatted about their plans for the future, Sarah talking about expanding the herd next spring, Emma showing sketches she'd made for a proper garden. "We should have a celebration," Emma said. "Invite the town, thank everyone for their help." "A barn dance," Sarah suggested. "We haven't had one since before Papa died." Martha looked around the table at her family, because that's what they were now, officially and truly a family. "A barn dance sounds perfect," she agreed. The dance was held 2 weeks later on a Saturday evening. The barn had been swept clean, lanterns hung from every beam. The town turned out in force, not just those who'd helped at the meeting, but nearly everyone from Red Bluff. Even people who'd once gossiped cruelly about Martha came, some to apologize, others simply to be part of the community celebration. Dutch brought his fiddle, and two other men had guitars. The music started as the sun set, lively and joyful. Martha stood with Elias, watching people fill the barn, watching her daughters laugh, with friends their own age. "May I have this dance?" Elias asked, extending his hand. Martha took it, and they moved onto the floor among the other couples. She wasn't graceful, never had been, but Elias led her surely, and she found herself laughing at the simple joy of it. As they danced, Martha caught sight of her reflection in one of the barn windows. She saw a woman who'd been beaten down and had gotten back up. A woman who'd fought impossible odds and won. A woman who'd learned that strength wasn't about never needing help, but about being brave enough to accept it. "What are you thinking?" Elias asked. "That I'm happy," Martha said simply. "Truly happy. I wasn't sure I'd ever feel this way again." "Neither was I," Elias admitted. "Funny how life works. I came down from that mountain looking for purpose, and I found everything. Purpose, family, home, you." The music shifted to a slower song, and they moved closer together. Around them, other couples swayed. Sarah danced with a young rancher's son, her face flushed and smiling. Emma sat with other girls her age, sketching the scene in her ever-present journal. "I love you," Elias said quietly, just for her. "I know it's soon, and I know we're still figuring things out. But I wanted you to know." Martha looked up at him, this mountain man who'd come looking for redemption and had helped her find her own. "I love you too," she said. "I think I have for a while. I just wasn't ready to admit it." They danced until late into the evening, until the lanterns burned low and people began to drift home. Dutch was one of the last to leave, stopping to shake Elias's hand and kiss Martha's cheek. "You did good," he told her. "Thomas would be proud. Hell, the whole territory should be proud. You stood up to power and won. That's no small thing." After everyone had gone, the family stood together in the yard, looking up at the stars. The night was cool and clear, the sky vast above them. "What happens now?" Emma asked. "Now we live," Martha said. "We work the ranch, we take care of each other, and we build the future we want instead of just surviving the one we got." She looked at the sign above the gate, Briggs Boone Ranch, and felt the rightness of it. Thomas's legacy preserved, but also transformed into something new. A partnership between past and future, between what was lost and what was found. They walked to the house together, tired but content. Before going inside, Martha turned to take one last look at her land, her home, her hard-won peace. "Thank you," she whispered to the night, to Thomas's memory, to whatever forces had brought Elias down from the mountain and into her life. "Thank you." Inside, the house was warm and welcoming. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. There was always work to be done on a ranch. But tonight they had won. Tonight they had everything that mattered. As Martha lay in bed that night, she thought about how far she'd come from the woman who'd stood in the barn 3 months ago, trying to repair a beam alone, too proud to accept help. She'd learned that pride could be a prison, that asking for help wasn't weakness, that love could come again. Even when you'd thought that door was closed forever, she reached over to the nightstand, where Thomas's ring sat in a small dish, honored, remembered, but no longer worn. On her left hand, the finger was bare, but that felt right now. Not empty, just waiting, open to possibility. Downstairs, she could hear Elias moving around in what would soon become their shared space. They were taking it slowly, courting properly, even though they were too old for such things according to town standards. But Martha found she liked the anticipation, the gradual unfolding of something precious. Through the window, she could see the barn lit by moonlight, could see the new sign that proclaimed a new beginning. Tomorrow, she'd wake up and work this land with Elias beside her. Her daughters would grow and flourish. The community would continue to support them. But tonight, right now, in this moment of perfect peace, Martha Briggs allowed herself to simply be, to rest, to feel safe and loved and whole. The widow who'd been too wide to wed had proven them all wrong. She'd found love on her own terms, kept her land through courage and community. and built a life worth living, and that, Martha thought as sleep took her, was victory enough for anyone. 6 months passed like a gentle river flowing, steady, purposeful, bringing life to everything it touched. Winter came and went, mild for once, and spring arrived with wildflowers blanketing the hills and the creek running high with snowmelt. The Briggs Boone Ranch thrived under shared stewardship, the partnership between Martha and Elias proving as fruitful as either had hoped. In the kitchen one April morning, Martha stood kneading bread dough while watching through the window as Elias worked with a new colt in the corral. His patience with animals never ceased to amaze her, the way he could gentle the wildest horse with nothing but time and kindness. She found herself smiling without realizing it, a common occurrence these days. Sarah came in from the barn, her arm fully healed now, stronger than before. At 20, she'd grown into herself, confident and capable. "The calving's going well," she reported. 10 new ones so far, all healthy? "Your father would be pleased," Martha said. "He always said spring calving was the true measure of a ranch's health." "I think Papa would be pleased about a lot of things," Sarah said, coming to stand beside her mother. She nodded toward the window where Elias worked. "Especially that. You're happy, Mama, really happy. I haven't seen you like this since, well, maybe ever." Martha's hands stilled in the dough. "Was I so unhappy before?" "Not unhappy exactly," Sarah said carefully. "But you were carrying everything alone. Even when Papa was alive, you carried the emotional weight by yourself. Now you have someone who shares it. That makes a difference. It did make a difference." Martha had spent so many years being strong, being sufficient unto herself, that she'd forgotten what it felt like to lean on someone. Elias had taught her that leaning wasn't falling. That partnership meant both people supporting each other, taking turns being strong when the other needed rest. Emma burst through the door, her sketch journal clutched to her chest, her face glowing with excitement. At 17, she'd blossomed, not just physically, but creatively. Her art had become remarkable, capturing not just what things looked like, but what they felt like. "Mama, look what came in the mail." She spread a letter on the table, smoothing it with trembling hands. "The Art Academy in Denver. They reviewed my portfolio. They want to offer me a scholarship." Martha's breath caught. "Emma, that's wonderful." "It's a full scholarship," Emma continued, her words tumbling over each other. "Room, board, tuition, everything. They said my work showed exceptional promise, and they'd be honored to nurture my talent." Sarah hugged her sister, both of them laughing. Martha joined the embrace, her heart swelling with pride and something else, bittersweet acknowledgement that her youngest was ready to fly. "When would you start?" Martha asked. "September." "If I go?" Emma's excitement dimmed slightly. "But that would mean leaving you and the ranch, especially now when things are finally good." "No," Martha said firmly. "You're going. This is your dream, your gift. We'll be fine here." "But Emma," Martha took her daughter's face in her hands. "I fought to keep this ranch so you and Sarah could have futures. Real futures, with choices. If your choice is art school in Denver, then that's what you'll do. We'll miss you desperately, but we'll be so proud we could burst." Elias came in then, drawn by the commotion, and Emma showed him the letter. His face broke into that rare, full smile that transformed him from weathered to beautiful. "This is remarkable, Emma. Denver's going to be lucky to have you." That evening, they celebrated with a special dinner. Martha used the good china, Thomas's mother's china, saved for important occasions, and cooked Emma's favorite foods. They ate and laughed and told stories, and Martha felt the strange mix of joy and grief that comes with watching your children grow toward independence. After dinner, Martha and Elias walked out to their favorite spot, a rise overlooking the ranch where you could see the whole valley spread below. The sun was setting, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. "Emma leaving will be hard on you," Elias observed. "Yes," Martha admitted, "but it's right. She has a gift, and gifts like that need to be nurtured. I won't clip her wings just because I'll miss her." "That's love," Elias said. "Real love. Wanting what's best for someone even when it costs you something." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the light fade. In the 6 months since the town meeting, their relationship had deepened steadily. They'd courted properly, rides together, dinners, long conversations on the porch. Elias had moved some of his things into the main house, but still kept the bunkhouse as his own space, respecting Martha's need to move at her own pace. "Martha," Elias said, his voice taking on a more serious tone, "I've been thinking about us, about what comes next." Martha's heart picked up speed. "Oh?" He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "I want to marry you, properly. Not as a business arrangement or a convenience, but because I love you and want to spend whatever time I have left on this earth by your side." Martha felt tears sting her eyes. "Elias, I know we said we'd take it slow," he continued, "and we have. But I'm 53 years old, Martha. I spent 16 years alone in the mountains, punishing myself for things I couldn't change. I don't want to waste any more time. I want to wake up beside you every morning. I want to grow old with you. I want to be your husband, not just your partner." "Yes," Martha said, the word coming out choked with emotion. "Yes, I'll marry you. Not because I need saving or protecting, but because I love you and want all those same things." He pulled a small box from his pocket, opening it to reveal a simple gold band. "It was my grandmother's," he explained. "Only thing I kept from my old life besides that scarred saddle. I'd be honored if you'd wear it." Martha let him slide the ring onto her left hand, where it sat beside the calluses and scars of a life well lived. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting all along for her finger. They married a month later in the same church where Martha had confronted Victor Stedman. But this time the church was decorated with flowers, filled with friends and well-wishers, resonant with joy instead of conflict. Sarah stood as Martha's witness, Emma as her bridesmaid. Dutch stood up for Elias, looking proud as any father. Martha wore a new dress, not white, that would be silly at her age, but a deep blue that Emma said made her eyes shine. She walked down the aisle alone because she was giving herself freely, not being given by anyone. When she reached the front where Elias waited, looking handsome in his best suit, his eyes shining with love, she felt complete in a way she'd never expected to feel again. Reverend Howell conducted a simple ceremony. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promises of partnership, respect, love, and laughter. When Elias kissed his bride, the church erupted in applause. The reception was held at the ranch, another barn dance like the one 6 months before, but this time celebrating not survival but joy. The whole town came, even some of the people who'd once been cruel. Victor Stedman, notably, was not present. He'd left the territory entirely after the investigation into his business practices had uncovered fraud in multiple land deals. As the evening wore on and the dancing continued, Martha stood with her new husband. Husband, what a word. What a gift, watching their community celebrate. "Happy?" Elias asked. "So happy I'm almost afraid," Martha admitted. "Like if I'm too happy, something will come and take it away." "Nothing's going to take this away," Elias said firmly. "We've both learned that you can't outrun sorrow or loss. They come when they come, but that's not a reason to hold back from joy. Joy is what makes the hard times bearable." Sarah approached with the young rancher's son, Jacob, whom she'd been courting. "Mama, Jacob and I have been talking." "About the future?" Martha raised an eyebrow. "Should I be expecting another wedding?" Sarah blushed, but held her ground. "Eventually, maybe. But for now, we want to work together. His father's ranch and ours, they share a border. There's good land between that neither family has been using. We thought maybe we could partner, run cattle together on shared grazing land, build something new while respecting what both our fathers built." Martha looked at her daughter, seeing not the angry, defensive girl who'd lost her father, but a confident young woman ready to build her own future. "I think that's a wonderful idea. We can work out the details later, but Sarah, I'm proud of you, not just for being smart about business, but for being open to partnership. That takes courage." After Sarah and Jacob returned to the dancing, Martha and Elias slipped away from the celebration. They walked to the rise overlooking the ranch, their special place, and stood looking down at the lights from the barn, listening to the music and laughter carrying on the wind. "Do you ever regret it?" Martha asked, coming down from the mountain. You could have stayed up there, stayed safe from all the complications of living among people. Never, Elias said without hesitation. The mountain was safe, but it wasn't living. He gestured at the ranch, the celebration, the life they'd built. This is living. The joy and the risk and the messiness of it all. I wouldn't trade a single moment. Martha leaned into him, and he wrapped his arm around her. They stood like that for a long time, two people who'd both been broken in different ways, who'd both survived isolation and loss, who'd found each other against all odds. Below them, Emma appeared in the doorway of the barn, backlit by lantern light. She waved up at them, then went back to sketching. Even in the middle of a party, she couldn't resist capturing moments of beauty. In 4 months, she'd leave for Denver, and the ranch would be quieter. But she'd come home for visits, and her art would carry pieces of this place with her wherever she went. Sarah was dancing with Jacob, their heads close together, planning their future. She'd stay on the ranch, work it alongside her mother and Elias, eventually bringing her own family into the legacy. And Martha would continue to work this land she'd fought so hard to keep. But now with a partner who saw her as an equal. She'd grow old here, on this ranch that bore both her name and her husband's, surrounded by children and eventually grandchildren, part of a community that had learned to see strength in unexpected places. "What are you thinking?" Elias asked, the question he asked often, always genuinely wanting to know. "I'm thinking about that summer morning when you rode up to the barn," Martha said. "How I almost sent you away. How close I came to letting pride stop me from accepting help. What stopped you?" "I don't know exactly. Desperation, maybe. Or some instinct that told me you were different. That you saw me." "I did see you," Elias said. "Still do. Every day I see you more clearly. Your strength, your courage, your capacity for love, despite how much you've been hurt." Martha turned in his arms to face him. "The town used to say I was too wide to wed. Too old, too big, too much. They were fools," Elias said. "You're not too much. You're exactly enough. More than enough. You're everything." She kissed him then long and deep, tasting promise and permanence. When they pulled apart, she saw her whole future reflected in his eyes, mornings working side by side, evenings on the porch, seasons turning, a life fully lived instead of merely survived. "We should get back to the party," Martha said. "They'll notice we're gone." "Let them notice," Elias replied. "Let them see that the widow, who was supposedly too much for any man, found a man big enough to match her. Not in size or strength, but in heart." They walked back to the barn hand in hand, and as they entered the celebration, the music swelled. Friends and neighbors surrounded them with well wishes and laughter. The night was young, the future was bright, and Martha Briggs, now Martha Boone, was finally truly home. Not just in the physical place, though she'd fought hard enough for this land, but home in herself, home in her family, home in the knowledge that she was loved, not despite who she was, but because of it. The cruel whispers that had once defined her, too wide, too old, too much, had been proven wonderfully, absolutely wrong. She wasn't too much. She was a woman of substance, of strength, of love large enough to rebuild what was broken and create what was new. And as the stars wheeled overhead and the music played on, Martha danced with her husband, surrounded by her daughters and her community, and knew with absolute certainty that every struggle, every tear, every moment of doubt had been worth it to arrive at this perfect moment. The widow nobody wanted had become the woman nobody could forget, not because she'd changed to fit their expectations, but because she'd forced them to expand their understanding of what strength looked like, what beauty meant, what love could be. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all. As the celebration continued into the late hours, Martha stood for just a moment apart from it all, committing every detail to memory. The sight of Emma sketching in the corner, Sarah laughing with Jacob, Elias being pulled onto the dance floor by Prudence Caldwell of all people. The warmth of community, the gift of second chances, the miracle of love found when you'd stopped looking. She touched the new ring on her finger, Elias's grandmother's ring, symbol of a love that had crossed generations to find her. She looked at the barn, where she'd once tried to repair a beam alone, now filled with people who'd become family, and she whispered into the night, to Thomas's memory and to whatever divine force had brought Elias down from that mountain. Thank you for all of it, the hard parts and the beautiful parts. Thank you. The music called her back, and she rejoined the celebration. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Running a ranch always did. But she'd face them with her partner beside her, her daughters strong and independent, her community backing her up. The ranch sign caught the moonlight, Briggs Boone Ranch, proclaiming to anyone who passed that this was a place of partnership, of transformation, of love that had conquered judgment and proved that real strength comes not from size or youth or perfection, but from the courage to keep fighting, the wisdom to accept help, and the grace to let love in when it finally arrives. And Martha Boone, formerly Martha Briggs, formerly the widow too wide to wed, stood in the center of her hard-won life and knew she was exactly where she was meant to be, home, loved, whole, the end of one story, the beginning of another, and all of it, every single moment worth the journey to get there.